All right, welcome to your All Arts Inclusive meeting. Right, so we have been doing this differently where all of us in the arts wing are all looking at the same decade and what is happening across the board with the arts. How this is working is we're going to go over what was going on at the time a little bit that was important to each of our areas, right? You guys have a chance to chime in, ask questions, and talk. To do that, you need to either raise your hand in the raise your hand button that Dennis loves very much, or type in the chat box and I can unmute you one at a time. But again, the mute button really helps on just making sure that everybody's not talking over everybody and the background noise isn't too much. If you do not have your picture up, please go ahead and make your camera be seen, as we need to see your lovely faces. Please and thank you. We are so all right. 1940s. Here's some little fun facts about like what was going on, just so you can get kind of a sense of the time period at the time. My first and favorite one is Captain America was born. 1941 is when we first got our first Captain America comic from Marvel. So yay for any like comic book nerds like I am. A gallon of gas cost 11 cents at the start of the decade. And by the end of the 40s, it was at 18 cents. So if we take in like equivalent of pay and all that, it's about $1.99 to $1.92. So with like inflation of the dollar and everything. The Cocker Spaniel was the most popular breed of the decade. Um, 50 countries established the United Nations. So that's the first time we saw a coming together like that of the nations in 1945. This one gets me a lot. The average life expectancy was 60 years old for men and 68 for women. So you were only expected to live into your 60s. That's harsh. Pinup girls became the new fad of the era, particularly around soldiers with the Second World War. Uh-oh, stop that. Only 55% of all US homes had indoor plumbing. In other words, you had to go outside to do your business to the outhouse. So imagine, like only half this class would have plumbing inside and be able to flush a toilet. On average, a new car cost $850 in the 40s. That's equivalent to about $1,000, $1,400. By the end, it like really ramped up to about like $15,000 average for a new car. New cars today are like 20, 30,000, 40, 50, 60, higher up models you go. There were two groundbreaking inventions of the 40s. We got the atomic bomb, and more importantly, we got everyone's favorite, the Slinky. And the first NBA game was ever played on November 1st, 1946. So there's some little fun facts about the decade of the 40s. Other big important thing that happened was we had World War II. This affected all of our areas and what all happened. Also, Peter's birthday is November 5th. We also got Bugs Bunny that year in the 40s, according to our chat Zooms. Oh, some people got some fun facts about the 40s. Great. So we're going to briefly look at art in the 40s. You really start to feel and see the effects of the war. So these three are done by Francis Bacon that our art class looked at, that is looking at the crucifixion. So all is this a series of Christ and the crucifixion. We've got some really kind of dark feelings here going out, right? So people were really painting their feelings, really looking deeply at how they felt in the environment around them. Another one by Francis Bacon. He's pretty dark in a lot of his themes. Other artists of importance. Everybody's most talked about favorite. We got most of Frida Kahlo's work done in the 40s. So this was her big time period that she was creating art. Even though her body of work is really small, she is very influential and very important artist. Right? Very big, important Mexican artist. Henry Moore. His sculptures are very, very important in the art world. There's a real sense of movement and texture to them. Even though they are abstract, you can still see the people and what's going on, right? Like here with our two faces. The other big important thing that we talked about with the arts is Hitler. So Hitler was a realist. He was not allowed to go to art school. Fast forward to when he took over and started this whole war and trying to take over the world thing. He hated anybody who didn't do realism and tried to get rid of and burn and destroy a lot of very important pieces of work. They had to smuggle them out of the country. They had to sort them out later. We've not recovered some of them. Some of them are still being hoarded in basements. There's a big art movement called the degenerative art movement that happened from that. I always like to say that if they would have just let Hitler into art school, World War II probably wouldn't have happened. So that sums up the art of the 1940s. Anybody have any comments or thoughts you want to share? Great, good discussion, guys. Well, we will turn it over to Ronnie's part, or Tobias, who'd like to go next.
You can take it, Ronnie.
Okay. All right.
You are not showing yourself. Logan, Jada, Anthony, Chris, please share your screen. Elizabeth.
Real quick to either Tobias or Rebecca, do you know if there is a way to keep track, like is there a list of who joined? I want to make sure I give credit to my students for joining. So is there a way to...
Yep, I can at least screenshot it.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you. All right, so I am going to flip over in just a second to the slideshow and do a quick recap. There are a couple faces that were with me on Tuesday, and so this will be a little bit of a repeat, but I'm definitely going to go faster than I did last week. So probably two of the biggest important things to know when it comes to fashion and design from the 40s is that the first 5 years of the decade, we were involved in the war, and everybody was involved in some way. So whether you enlisted as a soldier, or you volunteered, or you worked in the hospitals, or you worked in the factories, every single person had to do their part, from small children up into older people. So that's a big, important part. The other is rationing. So the popularity of clothing in the 20s and 30s was very flowy. It had lots of beading and sequins and fringe and tassels. When the war came, you couldn't get those materials because most of them came from Europe and Asia. So you couldn't get your hands on that stuff. So the clothing became much more form-fitting, Everything had a rule associated with it. So the number of buttons you were allowed to use, the thickness of your hems were all regulated. And if you didn't follow those rules, you were considered unpatriotic. Okay. So they were very, very serious about every American doing their part. So I'm going to really quickly flip. Let's see. And of course, on my other page, I am not on the right screen. Sorry. Here we go. Share screen with you all. Okay. So some familiar faces you will notice. Rosie the Riveter. This is a very common image from the 40s. She was one of the ideal body types, very strong, very athletic. Okay, and then this is Esther Williams. She was a famous movie star. Beyond that style was, as Rebecca pointed out, the pinup. She was the model type girl who soldiers carried a picture of these different pinup models in their, sometimes they had them tucked inside their hats. They would put them on the windows if they were pilots. They were even pictures painted of them on the sides of bomber airplanes. Okay, so main types of clothing in this era, you'll notice they're very similar. Utility clothing, uniforms, and work clothing. So your day-to-day office secretary, working in the business realm would wear something like this. If you were, many women joined the military or worked in hospitals, you would wear a uniform. And then there were the factory worker girls, okay? And I'm gonna skip a little bit ahead, but people still needed fun. So you would see in movies, this was considered very luxurious because look at all that extra fabric in the ruching and the pleating. Day-to-day wear, people did not wear this because again, it was just for celebrities and wealthy people. And also it was sort of fantasy, you know, in movies. This was not common amongst real people. Lots of primary colors in the 40s, okay? And also red, white, and blue. Everybody was wearing red, white, and blue. Okay. I told a little tidbit of a story in that back then everybody wore stockings and they were usually made of silk, but you couldn't get silk because they used it to make parachutes. So women couldn't get silk stockings. So then they had nylon stockings, but those got really hard to get too. So they would dye the skin on their legs with like iodine or different kinds of makeup, and they would have a friend paint the seam line up the back because it was pretty scandalous not to wear stockings. Then you've got the victory rolls. Hair got really elaborate because it didn't cost money to do crazy wild hair, and women still wanted to look pretty even though they were wearing uniforms and kind of simpler clothes. So hairstyles got very, very wild. Lots of headpieces and hats. Everybody wore hats. Okay, I'm gonna flip forward really quick to men's styles. Okay, most men were enlisted and they wore their uniforms even when they were off duty because it was a sign that you were patriotic, it was prestigious, and it commanded a lot of respect. So if you were in the military, you wore your uniform. Those that weren't enlisted wore their civvies, civilian clothes. Look how high-waisted these pants are. Short ties, wide, boxy suits. Women went crazy with hats. Men went crazy with ties. And they had silky handkerchief or fabric hat bands. Usually had feathers or something decorative in their hats. We talked about the zoot suits on Tuesday. You can see, look at all this extra fabric in here. That was a style mostly on the West Coast. Then men would wear, and it was considered very unpatriotic and controversial. And there would be gangs of young men who would wander around, usually military guys. And if they saw someone in a zoot suit, they would basically beat them up. And which is probably one of the also reasons too is it was thinly veiled racism, because most of the men who wore this style were of Hispanic or Latin descent. Another iconic image, everybody I'm sure has seen this, the sailor coming home, peace and victory. Whoops. And lastly, as the war ended and soldiers came home, they were very, very, very happy to see their wives. And so between 9 months and 2 to 3 years later, we got the baby boom, which is where the word boomer comes from. Lots and lots of babies born in the next couple of years. And as things became less scarce, lots of outfits with wider silhouettes, more fabric, people got to get fancier. So that will be next week. All right, any questions for me? Chat. All right. Looks like a lot of the shoes were big too. Yeah, but if you look at those shoes too, they're pretty similar to what men are wearing today when they wear really nice shoes. Like if you go to church or you have a job interview or something, they're still kind of basic, boring leather shoes. I don't know. But, all right. And last bit of questions before we go to Tobias. All righty. Let's do it.
All right. So, since I am covering kind of the music side of things, I won't have stuff to show you. I don't have like a PowerPoint, so I'm just going to talk through it. If you want to like pin up my screen or whatever you need to do to see me. Okay. So for starters, to talk about like the style of music, I could do that for a very, very long time. Instead, I want to kind of point out one really important fact that has to do with the technology that happens in the 40s. Because it's the beginning of what changes recorded music for the rest of our entire world. And I would say like we wouldn't have anything we have that, you know, we currently use without some of the stuff that happened in the 40s. Now, because it was the war, it was actually something that was invented for technologically advancing the war. If you watched my lesson on Monday, I talk about it in length on a timeline. So if we look at this, I know it's not super great, but basically we have the 1900s, and then around here we have the invention of the record, and then here we go in the 40s. Now, this whole stint of time, basically from, let's just say the 1900s to the 1938, recording music was done only one way. Now, I want everyone to think about this for a second. The only way to record music was live, real time, and it all had to happen all at once. So what it would look like is one room, big room, small room, doesn't matter, and one microphone in the middle of the room. And that microphone was connected via cable to a device that had a record on it, but the record was blank. There was nothing on it, no grooves on it yet. It was just a kind of a waxy material. And the needle was on the record. And then the audio that would go into the microphone would travel through the cable, and then it would make the needle move as the record is spinning. And those grooves would be created in real time, just like the audio is happening in the room. But if you made a mistake, you had to throw the whole thing out. There was no undo button. There was no going back, which meant A, it was really expensive, and B, you really had to have your stuff figured out before you even got in that space. And as such, we don't really have a lot of honest to goodness recordings of music that was happening, you know, up into the 40s really. And so what changed was the advent and the invention of tape. Now, if you know me and you've been in my classes, you know that I'm like a big fanatic about tape. But the reason tape was so important was that if you don't know how it works, basically there was this strip of like a plastic, tape, and it would go on these two reels, and on it was painted this kind of magnetic film, and that film could be information could be pressed onto it using a magnet, using a tape head. And the cool part is that if you recorded something on the tape and you made a mistake, you could rewind it and then re-record over the top of it, which I know that doesn't seem like that big of a deal now that we have computers and we can just hit undo, but seriously, that was a game changer because A, it wasn't as expensive anymore because the disc didn't have to get thrown out. And then B, I mean, well, there's something that really changed everything, which was that you didn't just record one thing on the same piece of tape. You could record two things at different times, meaning you could put all the music down with like the instruments, and then you could have the vocalist come in and listen to that music while recording the vocals. That is called multi-tracking. Now, without multi-tracking, music that we know of today wouldn't exist. And so from here on out, what we're going to see is that technology really influences everything that basically like gets made from probably like 1945-ish onward. If you guys want to, spend some time watching something that's kind of fun to watch, if you know this, the movie Fantasia, the Disney movie, and I think it might be on Disney Plus, I think, if you have it. But that was the first movie or / like commercial piece of art that actually came out using that multi-track type of recording. And in like this day and age, somehow I got muted. In this day and age, that would be the equivalent of like stereo sound in a theater being like surround sound, something no one had ever experienced before. So if you go back and listen to that, I bet it's probably been, upgraded and maybe changed a little bit since then. But at the time, it was really revolutionary to have that kind of audio, especially a part of a film. And then with regards to the styles, there was like two main styles you would see in recorded music. One being big band music. So that'd be like wartime music. And you probably see in movies like, I don't know what they're actually called. Maybe Ronnie and Rebecca know, but there were like ballroom type places that you would go, and there would be these big bands that would play in the big dance floor. And we get the term wartime music because that was a lot of like soldiers coming home and like wartime events that were happening. But these bands were all about like making music for the masses to dance to. That was kind of like the whole theme. That was the concept. Yeah, Rebecca.
They're at the VFWs.
Yeah.
So like the veteran kind of places for them to come back, and they were also at what was called dance halls.
Yes, yeah. So dance halls. But again, the concept all really was revolving around this kind of like attitude of everybody getting together, having a good time, very positive. Now, if you look at like the art that Rebecca showed and the music that was happening, the music was very positive. Like it all seemed very uplifting because that was kind of what it was for. But you didn't really like that. I'm talking about recorded music. Now, you don't really see a lot of the other music that was probably a lot more like representative of the negativity and like some of the gnarly stuff that was going on, because those weren't artists that were going into those expensive studios. And it's kind of a shame that we'll never get to hear that stuff, but that's definitely, it was happening, I'm sure. It just wasn't happening in studios. And then lastly, there would be the jazz movement was really growing. And of course, like you wouldn't have any completed conversation without including jazz. It really, like the first jazz recording was around like almost 1920-ish. And then from the 20s onward, it just kind of, its own culture started to form, and it became more and more legitimate in the eyes of the public. But that would be where we get a lot more like experimental music. And that's the birth of what we would probably turn into a lot of other things, blues and rock and roll, and all that evolves into that. But none of it would really exist without the ability like for that multi-tracking. It wouldn't exist in a way that we now experience it today. So when we get into the 50s, I'll kind of look at and see like what type of music wouldn't actually really be that music without that technology. And we'll kind of touch on that. And my last thing I'll say is that if I have to connect it to something that really, you would understand, the Beatles coming into the scene soon, they are the ones that took multi-tracking in there. That's one of the main things that made them famous. So if you have to think of like the mile marker, the Beatles really wouldn't be the Beatles without that technology existing.
All right, so I have, the reason Tobias got muted, which I'm sorry about that, Tobias, I have allowed for you guys to unmute yourself. So if you have a relevant comment, we're gonna try this. We're all big kids in here. So we're gonna try it. So if you have something you want to add, something you have learned this week about the 40s and the arts, or something you'd like to share, I will allow you to unmute yourself, say what you'd like to say, and then remute yourself, please. No, Peter, you don't have to raise your hand. You can just go ahead and unmute and start talking. So you now have power back, children. So what's something you've learned this week? So maybe start calling on people.
That I need to do work more often.
That's a good thing to learn. Yep, work more often every day would be useful.
Consistent work.
Yeah, we're all getting into that groove, Peter.
Real quick, sorry if I just almost cut somebody off. There's been a lot of confusion for my students, so I thought I would just, with all of you on there, really quickly clarify. I have posted in Google Classroom and in ManageBack,
One, two.
and
Okay, good.
email, the link to draw the croquis. That's the body form. There's a men's version and there's a women's version, and you can choose whichever one you want. If you do that basic croquis and you use like a Sharpie to darken it, then you can lay that down, put another piece on, and use that for your weekly sketches. So every week you should be uploading in Google Classroom a sketch. So this week, due tomorrow, is your 1940s sketch. If you were in my jewelry and my accessories class, you're gonna wanna definitely pay attention like to the hats and the shoes, and okay? So hopefully that clears things up. Next week we'll do the 50s, so you'll need to upload a sketch of 50s fashion and design. Okay.
I
Added, hold on real quick, Tobias. I have added a actually version you can copy and type in on the critique for art. So if you're in my art and you're having to do the critiques, you actually have a version you can now write in. Take it to Tobias.
I was just gonna go back. I was looking at the comments, and Haley asked when the amp was invented. And so this is kind of pretty awesome when you really think about it. When records were first being done, there wasn't even a microphone. There was a big cone, and you see it like on Harry Potter and stuff. But it was this giant-looking Dr. Seuss cone, and all the audio in the room would go into the cone and then down onto the record needle. The microphone was what kind of changed, and the microphone required an amp. So it was about like the 20s. That was when the technology kind of started becoming a thing. But again, it was super exclusive until we started seeing it in like other studios and stuff. But yeah, about the 2025. And then in terms of my expectations for my students, I want each of my students every week to be looking at 1 to 3 songs from that decade, and then just putting them into a playlist. They could be on a YouTube playlist, they could be on Spotify. Like, I'm sure that you can find a service out there that you're using that you can put the playlist together. If you're smart, you just do like 1 or 3 songs a week, and then by the time the quarter's over, you have your whole playlist finished. It's not that difficult, guys. I just want you to interact and, you know, take part in our conversation and our feed in the Google Classroom.
There's a question on the feed about it being, well, a comment, it's not really a question, but about it's hard to complete art and remake art when you don't have supplies. As a reminder, if you email me what you're needing, I will deliver art supplies to you. So if you need something, if you're limited, and don't feel bad, just again, shoot me an email, say, Miss Rebecca, I need colored pencils and some paints and some paintbrushes and some paper. I will come and gladly like give that to you guys to use. Just let me know. Our supplies are just sitting in the classroom, not being used. So email me, okay?
Me too.
All right, guys, who wants to discuss like what you've learned?
That math is hell.
Okay, good to know, Christian. Anything else?
What does it have anything to do with math? It's art.
That
So-
is hard. Go ahead, Peter.
I learned that an alternating current generator can be a sine wave oscillator.
Really?
Yeah, because it's toggling back and forth, negative and positive, on either input. So that means that it goes slowly and exponentially. It goes up, and then it will cave back down and go like a sine wave.
Huh.
So all you need to do is make a generator, well, a AC generator that has a low enough voltage that it doesn't blow everything up in your speaker, and then you can have a sine wave oscillator.
Nice. Yeah, don't blow stuff up. That's
Yeah.
really cool. Anybody else want to share something they learned?
So I just have a quick question. Just to make sure I'm clear, so degenerate art is like unrealistic, right?
Correct.
Okay, so it's okay,
Basically-
like it doesn't have to really be like people or anything, it's just something that's unrealistic.
Basically, the more it would make Hitler cringe, the better it is. Make Hitler cringe.
Yes, make his ghost cringe.
That's right.
Also, Tobias, how necessarily does a micro cassette tape recorder like this work?
Same exact technology. The tape is a little bit thinner and smaller, but the magnet, it imprints information onto that little film, and then that information gets, recorded. That's the term. And then the player will replay that information into a speaker.
And when it gets messed up, you need a pencil.
This thing is so small, though.
I know.
Isn't that a transformer?
Maybe.
Yeah, I've seen it at school before. It's a really cool transformer.
That's cool. Next
I
week,
don't know what you're talking about.
So next week in art, you guys will have some kind of guiding questions to help you for discussion day for on Thursday, just FYI. And Walt is saying hi to you guys, by the way.
Oh,
I know, I hear her.
Walter!
whoa!
Walter! When is he having babies with the other dog?
He's going over to his girlfriend's today after this.
Walter!
I will buy
So, hopefully in a couple months. I'll be sharing Walter baby pictures.
You better.
That is not social distancing, Rebecca.
That's not right. That is the
Pets are
opposite.
safe from corona.
Oh my gosh, it's been so big.
That's the opposite of social distancing, yeah. I'm gonna go ahead and mute Walter.
All right. Anybody got any other questions, comments?
If it's like off task, but also on task.
Ooh, I'm intrigued. Go for it, pal.
Why is his right wrist higher than his left literally every time I draw him?
Huh. Pal, you and I can have a conversation on that.
He's standing on a hill sideways.
I drew him with a ruler. How does that work?
He had an accident, and we don't judge, pal.
I know.
You didn't have a laser level.
My mom literally just said maybe it was a longshoreman.
I don't get it.
That's awesome. Hi, Andrew.
That is also a very cute dog.
It's Dobby.
Can
Oh,
some-
here's
He
Bob.
hears Walter and keeps on putting his ears up.
Yeah.
I was holding my
there's a
sister's dog
Bob.
earlier.
We are now showing animals. So if anybody has anything else, I'm going to go ahead and stop recording. I know.